In medieval England, a mysterious dying king leaves his daughter just one gift, a simple polished stone with cryptic instructions to give it to the one who deserves it. For 100 days, Princess Eleanor refuses every suitor who comes bearing riches, armies and political alliances, shocking the entire kingdom. But on the 101st day, when a stranger appears with empty hands and simply extends his palm, saying, "I believe that's mine," Eleanor feels an inexplicable certainty. Why does she trust this man she's never met? What secrets did her father keep from her? And most disturbing of all, could someone within the castle walls be responsible for the king's death? Discover a tale of hidden guardians, royal conspiracy, and a love that transcends station in this emotional medieval romance that will keep you guessing until the final revelation. Follow our channel for more unforgettable stories that will move your heart. Subscribe, like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The gentle rain tapped against the high stone windows of the tower as Princess Eleanor, aged 38, clutched a smooth, cold, polished stone in her hand. It was the only object her father, the king, had left her before he died. The initial shock captivated anyone who heard this tale. The king had left no crowns, no letters, only a stone, accompanied by an enigmatic phrase: "When you know who deserves it, give it away." The kingdom of Northumbria had been in a state of quiet mourning since King Edward's passing 3 months prior. Eleanor, with her auburn hair and piercing green eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone twice her age, had assumed the responsibilities of the throne with a grace that belied her inner turmoil. Each morning she would wake before dawn, clutch the stone to her heart, and whisper the mysterious words her father had spoken on his deathbed. "When you know who deserves it, give it away," she murmured, watching raindrops trace patterns down the leaded glass. The stone felt unusually warm today, almost as if responding to her touch. Since the king's death, Eleanor had refused one by one every suitor who came from distant kingdoms, bringing riches, lands, armies. 100 proposals denied, a scandal that had stirred all of medieval England. Lords and ladies whispered behind ornate fans and goblets of wine, wondering if the princess had lost her mind with grief. "She cannot rule alone," they would say. "A woman needs a husband, especially one who would be king." Eleanor heard their whispers, but remained unmoved. Each suitor had paraded before her in the great hall, displaying their wealth, power, and supposed charm. Some brought chests of gold, others promised military alliances. The Duke of Westmoreland had even brought 7 white stallions adorned with jewels. Yet with each proposal, Eleanor felt the stone grow colder in her pocket, as if her father's spirit was guiding her choices from beyond. The next day, the 101st, when everyone expected to finally see the princess surrender to political pressure, the royal messenger burst into her private chamber, his face flushed with exertion and bewilderment. "Your Highness," he panted, bowing deeply. "A man, a simple man, a foreigner, requests an audience." Eleanor looked up from the ancient text she had been studying, one of her father's favorites about the legendary kings of old. "A simple man? Not a noble or envoy?" "No, Your Highness," the messenger replied, his brow furrowed. "He wears no coat of arms, carries no gifts. He simply asked to see you." Lady Catherine, Eleanor's most trusted lady-in-waiting since childhood, scoffed from her position by the fire. "Send him away, Thomas. The princess has no time for commoners with petty requests, especially not today." But Eleanor felt something stir within her, a curiosity perhaps, or something deeper that she couldn't quite name. The stone in her pocket suddenly felt warm, almost hot against her thigh. "No," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. "I will see him." "But Your Highness," Catherine protested. "The council is expecting you to receive the Prince of Mercia today. They say he brings a proposal that will secure our northern borders forever." Eleanor rose from her chair, her emerald dress rustling against the stone floor. "The Prince of Mercia has waited this long. He can wait a bit longer." As she prepared to leave her chamber, Eleanor paused, her hand hovering over the small wooden box where she usually kept her father's stone. Something compelled her to take it with her today, something she had never done before. The stone had always remained her private secret, a mystery she contemplated alone in her chambers. But today, inexplicably, she felt the need to carry it. The audience hall was filled with courtiers eager to witness the princess's meeting with the Prince of Mercia. Their faces fell in disappointment when the royal herald announced instead, "A visitor from foreign lands seeks audience with Her Highness, Princess Eleanor of Northumbria." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Eleanor took her seat on the throne. That had been her father's, conscious of how it still seemed too large for her frame despite her regal posture. The stone weighed heavily in the hidden pocket of her dress, seeming to pulse with an energy all its own. "Send him in," she commanded, her voice echoing in the vaulted hall. The massive oak doors swung open, and a hush fell over the assembly. The man who entered was not what anyone expected. He wore no rags, but his clothing was simple, a well-worn leather jerkin over a linen shirt, sturdy boots that spoke of many miles traveled. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a face that, while not conventionally handsome, possessed a striking quality that drew the eye. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was tied back from a face weathered by sun and wind. But it was his eyes that captured Eleanor's attention. Deep blue, like the sea after a storm, and filled with an intensity that seemed to look straight through her royal facade. He was 40, perhaps, but carried himself with the confidence of a man who had faced life's hardships and emerged stronger. As he approached the throne, he did not bow or kneel as protocol demanded. The guards tensed, hands moving to their swords, but Eleanor raised a hand to stay them. The stranger stopped at the appropriate distance and simply looked at her, his gaze unwavering and uncomfortably perceptive. The audience held its collective breath, waiting for him to be reprimanded for his boldness. Instead, he spoke, his voice deep and accented with a tongue Eleanor couldn't quite place. "Princess," he said simply, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The court erupted in indignant murmurs. How dare this commoner address the princess so directly? How dare he claim she possessed something of his? But Eleanor barely heard them. Her heart was pounding, blood rushing in her ears as her hand instinctively moved to the pocket where the stone lay hidden. How could this man know? No one knew about the stone except herself and her father, now dead. "What exactly do you believe I have of yours?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The man's lips curved into the slightest of smiles, not mocking, but knowing. He simply extended his hand, palm up, waiting. Something inexplicable happened then, a moment that would later be recounted in whispers throughout the kingdom. Princess Eleanor, known for her caution and rationality, rose from her throne and descended the 3 steps to stand before the stranger. Without a word, she withdrew the stone from her pocket. The audience gasped. This object, whatever it was, had clearly been kept secret. Eleanor herself couldn't understand the force that moved her, the certainty that filled her bones as she placed the smooth, polished stone into the stranger's outstretched hand. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of recognition passed through her, though she was certain she had never met this man before. His fingers closed around the stone, and his expression softened into something like relief. "Your father said you would know," he said quietly, for her ears alone. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "You knew my father?" The stranger nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers. Better than most. He opened his hand, revealing the stone resting on his palm. To Eleanor's astonishment, what had appeared to be a simple polished river stone now revealed faint markings in the light, symbols she had never noticed before. "My name is Arthur," he said, his voice low and intimate amidst the buzzing confusion of the court, "and I have a story to tell you about your father, about this stone, and about a promise made long ago." The man, Arthur, closed his fingers around the stone once more and took a step back, breaking the strange spell that had fallen over them. With a slight incline of his head that wasn't quite a bow but acknowledged her station, he said more loudly, "With your permission, Princess, I would speak with you privately." The Lord Chancellor, an elderly man who had served her father faithfully, stepped forward in protest. "Your Highness, this is most irregular. The Council awaits your decision on the Prince of Mercia's proposal. This person can surely wait." Eleanor found herself at a crossroads, torn between duty and the inexplicable certainty that this moment, this man, was somehow crucial to understanding her father's final gift. The stone that had been her constant companion, her only link to her father's final wishes, was now in this stranger's hands, and somehow it felt right. "The Prince of Mercia has waited 100 days, she said firmly. "He can wait one more. Clear the hall." As the courtiers reluctantly filed out, many casting suspicious glances at the mysterious foreigner, Eleanor felt her heart racing with anticipation and fear. Who was this man who knew her father? What was the true meaning of the stone? And why, despite all logic and royal protocol, did she feel compelled to trust him? The massive doors closed behind the last of the court, leaving Eleanor alone with Arthur and two guards who stood at a discreet distance. The great hall, usually filled with the bustle and intrigue of court life, felt suddenly intimate and charged with possibility. "Speak!" Eleanor commanded, trying to reclaim some of her royal composure. "Tell me how you knew my father and why he would entrust you with knowledge of this stone." Arthur looked at her with those penetrating blue eyes, and for a moment, Eleanor thought she saw a flicker of something like tenderness in them. "It is not a short tale, Princess, but I promise you, by the time it concludes, you will understand why your father left you this stone, and why he knew, even from beyond death, that you would recognize who truly deserved it." Outside, the rain continued to fall, beating a gentle rhythm against the ancient stones of the castle, as Eleanor prepared to hear a story that would forever change her understanding of her father, her kingdom, and perhaps most surprisingly, her own heart. The great hall of Northumbria Castle fell into an unusual silence, broken only by the distant patter of rain against stained glass and the occasional crackle from the enormous hearth. Eleanor stood before Arthur, conscious of the curious eyes of her guards stationed discreetly by the massive oak doors. The afternoon light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the intricate tapestries depicting the glorious history of her ancestors. "Please, sit!" Eleanor gestured toward a carved chair near the fire, abandoning protocol that would have kept a commoner standing in her presence. She settled across from him, arranging her emerald gown around her. Up close, she could see the fine lines etched around Arthur's eyes, not from age alone, but from a life lived fully, perhaps harshly. "How did you know my father?" she asked, her voice softer now that they were away from the court's prying ears. Arthur turned the stone over in his hands, his fingers tracing the faint markings that Eleanor had somehow never noticed in all the years she'd held it. His hands were strong yet gentle, the hands of someone who had both built and protected. "I met King Edward 20 years ago during the Northern Rebellion," he began, his deep voice resonating in the space between them. "I was not a knight or nobleman, but a scholar and swordsman from distant lands. Your father saved my life during an ambush, and in return, I pledged him my service, not as a subject, but as a friend." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, Her father, though beloved by his people, had been known for maintaining royal distance. The idea that he would consider a foreign commoner a friend seemed improbable. As if reading her thoughts, Arthur smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his solemn face and reached his storm blue eyes. "Your skepticism is warranted, Princess. Your father was indeed a king first and foremost, dedicated to his crown and kingdom. But in private moments, away from the trappings of court, he was simply Edward, a man with doubts, hopes, and a wisdom that extended far beyond politics." Eleanor felt an unexpected pang in her chest. Since her father's death, the court had spoken only of King Edward the ruler, the strategist, the diplomatic genius. No one had spoken of the man who had taught her to identify constellations from the North Tower, who had laughed until tears came when she'd accidentally set the court astrologer's beard on fire with a candle at age 6. "This stone," Arthur continued, holding it up so it caught the firelight, revealing swirling patterns within its seemingly ordinary surface, "is not merely a stone. It is an ancient talisman passed through your father's line for generations. It is said to reveal truth when placed in the hands of one with a sincere heart." Eleanor's eyes widened. "But I held it for months and saw nothing but a polished river stone." "Because you were not seeking truth yet," Arthur replied gently. "You were honoring your father's memory, keeping his final gift close. But you were not yet asking the questions the stone could answer." A small frown creased Eleanor's brow. "And what questions are those?" Arthur leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "Who you can trust, who will stand beside you, not for your crown, but for your heart, who will see Eleanor not just the Princess of Northumbria." A strange sensation unfurled in Eleanor's chest, something between indignation and a disturbing sense that this stranger understood her in ways no suitor ever had. "You speak as though you know me, sir." "I don't," he acknowledged with a slight incline of his head. "But your father spoke of you often, with such pride and worry both. He feared that after his passing you would be surrounded by wolves dressed as loyal hounds." Eleanor stiffened, thinking of her council members, the neighboring princes, the court sycophants who'd circled closer since her father's death. "And you? What manner of beast are you, coming here with cryptic tales and claiming knowledge of a stone that has been my sole comfort these past months?" For the first time, Arthur looked uncomfortable, a flash of something like guilt crossing his features. "I am merely a messenger, Princess, one who promised a dying friend to ensure his daughter would not be deceived. My father was surrounded by physicians and advisors when he died," Eleanor said, her voice hardening. "I was at his side. He spoke to no foreign messenger." Arthur's expression softened with compassion. "He sent for me 3 days before his final breath, when he knew death was inevitable. We spoke when you were resting, at his insistence. He made me swear to remain hidden until you had faced 100 suitors." "Why 100? Eleanor asked, bewildered. "Because he believed that after 100 disappointments, you would be ready to recognize sincerity when you encountered it." Arthur's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Your father knew you well, Princess. Your intellect, your stubbornness, your loyalty to Northumbria above your own happiness." Eleanor felt tears threatening for the first time since the funeral. No one spoke of her father as a person anymore, only as the departed king whose policies they could now reshape. Hearing his thoughtfulness, his understanding of her character reflected in this stranger's words, broke something loose inside her. "What does the stone truly reveal?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Arthur extended his hand, the stone resting on his palm. "See for yourself." With trembling fingers, Eleanor took the stone back. As her skin made contact with the smooth surface, the faint markings seemed to glow momentarily, not with light, but with a deeper significance she couldn't quite grasp. "I see nothing different," she admitted, frustrated. Not with your eyes, Arthur said quietly, with your heart. When you placed this stone in my hand earlier, what did you feel? Eleanor considered the question, remembering the inexplicable certainty that had guided her action. I felt that it was right, that somehow the stone belonged with you, if only for a moment. Arthur nodded. The stone doesn't create truth, Princess. It merely confirms what your heart already knows, but your mind may doubt. Your father believed you would need such clarity in the days following his death. Eleanor studied Arthur's face, searching for deception, but finding only steady, calm certainty. You said you were a scholar. What do you study? Human nature, he replied, the patterns of history, the wisdom in ancient texts, the mysteries of the heart and mind. Your father and I spent many nights debating philosophy and the nature of just rulership. A bitter laugh escaped Eleanor, and yet he left me with nothing but riddles and a magical stone when I needed guidance most. Arthur's expression grew serious. He left you with something far more valuable, Princess. He left you with trust in your own judgment, 100 suitors, 100 tests of your discernment, and here you stand, having refused them all, unswayed by wealth or flattery or political advantage. Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing before the fire. And what am I to do now? My counsel grows impatient. Neighboring kingdoms begin to whisper that Northumbria is vulnerable with only a woman on the throne. What does your heart tell you? Arthur asked simply. Eleanor turned to him, frustration evident in her stance. My heart has no place in matters of state. Your father believed otherwise, Arthur said, rising to stand before her. Once again, he merely extended his hand, palm up, not demanding, merely offering. He believed that a ruler who loses touch with their heart soon loses touch with their people. Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, aware of the weight of the stone in her own palm and the even heavier weight of her kingdom's future on her shoulders. This man, this stranger who spoke of her father with such familiarity, who carried himself with the quiet confidence of one who had nothing to prove, could she trust him? I need time, she said finally, time to consider your words and decide. What truth the stone has revealed? Arthur lowered his hand with a respectful nod. Of course, I have waited this long. I can wait longer. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called out, Where will you stay? Arthur glanced back, a hint of that transformative smile touching his lips. I have modest lodgings in the village. Ask for the foreigner at the Swan's Nest when you wish to speak again. With that, he bowed, the first time he had shown such deference, and walked toward the doors with unhurried dignity. Eleanor watched him go, the stone warm in her hand, her mind filled with questions, but her heart surprisingly calmer than it had been since her father's death. Who was this Arthur truly? And why did she feel, against all reason, that his arrival marked the beginning of something both terrifying and necessary? The Royal Library of Northumbria Castle stood silent and imposing, its towering shelves laden with leather-bound volumes collected over generations. Dust motes danced in the golden shafts of afternoon sunlight that streamed through the tall, arched windows. Eleanor paced between the ancient oak tables, her silk slippers making soft whispers against the stone floor. The conversation with Arthur had left her restless, filled with questions that demanded answers. Lady Catherine watched from a respectful distance, concern etched on her gentle features. Your Highness, the Prince of Mercia still awaits your response. The council grows most impatient. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, her mind elsewhere. Tell them I am indisposed. I require solitude. Catherine hesitated, her loyalty to Eleanor warring with her sense of duty to the kingdom. As you wish, Your Highness. But may I remind you that Lord Blackthorn has called for an emergency council. Meeting tomorrow. The northern lords grow restless, and there are rumors of Saxon raids near the coast. I am well aware of my responsibilities, Catherine, Eleanor replied, more sharply than she intended. Seeing her lady-in-waiting flinch, she softened her. Atone. Forgive me. I simply need time with my father's belongings. Perhaps there I will find the clarity I seek." After Catherine departed with a curtsy, Eleanor moved toward the rear of the library where her father's personal collection was kept. A portrait of King Edward hung on the wall, stern and regal in his ceremonial armor, yet with a hint of kindness in his eyes that the court painter had captured perfectly. Eleanor gazed up at it, searching for guidance in the painted eyes. "What were you trying to tell me, father?" she whispered. "Who is this man who speaks of you as a friend rather than a king?" With reverent hands, she unlocked the ornate cabinet. Beneath the portrait, here lay King Edward's private journals, his collection of maps, and personal correspondence deemed too intimate for the royal archives. Eleanor had avoided this cabinet since his death, finding the grief too raw to confront such personal remnants. But now, driven by the mystery of Arthur and the stone, she could delay no longer. She began methodically, carefully examining each document, each leather-bound journal. Her father's handwriting, bold yet elegant, filled page after page with observations on governance, reflections on Eleanor's progress as his heir, and personal musings on life and mortality. She found diplomatic correspondence, private letters to distant relatives, and detailed notes on the kingdom's defenses, but nothing about Arthur, nothing about a mysterious stone. Frustration mounting, Eleanor pressed her fingers against her temples. What was she missing? Arthur had spoken with such conviction, such intimate knowledge of her father's thoughts. Yet here, among Edward's most private possessions, she found no trace of the man. Her eyes fell upon the cabinet itself, studying its craftsmanship more carefully. It was her father's prized possession, gifted to him by Byzantine emissaries. In her childhood, the intricate marquetry depicted scenes from ancient myths, heroes, monsters, gods in disguise. On impulse, Eleanor ran her fingers along the decorated edge, feeling for anything unusual. Her breath caught as her fingertips detected a slight irregularity in the wood near the bottom corner. Pressing firmly, she heard a soft click and a hidden drawer slid outward, a secret compartment concealed within the cabinet's ornate design. Inside lay a small bundle tied with faded blue ribbon, the color her mother had favored before her death when Eleanor was just a child. With trembling hands, Eleanor lifted the package and carefully untied the ribbon. The bundle contained letters, dozens of them, their parchment yellowed with age, their wax seals broken. The first letter she unfolded was dated 15 years prior. The handwriting was unfamiliar, strong, with a distinctive flourish to the capital letters. Her eyes immediately went to the signature at the bottom. Arthur. Eleanor sank into her father's chair, her heart pounding as she began to read. "My dear friend Edward, I have arrived safely in Constantinople. The Byzantine court is everything you described. Magnificent in its excesses, terrifying in its intrigues. I have made contact with the scholar we discussed and secured the texts you sought. They will be sent with a trusted merchant who departs next month. Regarding the other matter, yes, the rumors of conspiracy among your northern lords appear to have substance. I have intercepted correspondence that suggests Lord Harlow's professed loyalty masks deeper ambitions. Exercise caution. My friend, not all who smile at court wish you well. I miss our debates by the fire. Few men appreciate Aristotle's paradoxes as you do, and fewer still can best me at chess while discussing the military strategies of Alexander. Until my return, Arthur." Eleanor's hands trembled as she set down the first letter and picked up another, this one dated a year later. "Edward, the mission in Francia proved more dangerous than anticipated. I encountered your friends from Saxony. They were most displeased to find their planned ambush of your trade convoy thwarted. One left this world to explain himself to his maker. The others now understand the cost of betraying Northumbria's trust. The stone you entrusted to me continues to serve well. Twice it has warned of poison in my cup, glowing faintly when touched to tainted wine. A remarkable object indeed. I understand now why your ancestors guarded it so jealously. I observed Princess Eleanor from a distance during the Midsummer Festival. She has your intelligence and her mother's grace. You were right to worry about potential suitors. I counted 3 young lords watching her with more ambition than affection in their eyes. The princess, however, seemed delightfully oblivious, more interested in the falconry demonstration than in their attempted flirtations. Your faithful friend, Arthur. Eleanor gasped, memories of that festival rushing back. She had been 23, recently returned from her education in Paris. She remembered the falconry exhibition vividly, but had no recollection of being observed by a mysterious stranger. How had this man watched her without her knowledge, and why had her father sanctioned such surveillance? Letter after letter revealed a hidden history. Arthur serving as her father's unofficial agent, traveling to foreign courts, uncovering plots, gathering intelligence that never appeared in official reports. The correspondence spanned years, documenting a deep friendship between king and commoner that defied the rigid hierarchies of medieval society. A letter dated just a year before her father's death made Eleanor's blood run cold. Edward, the physician from Venice, confirms my suspicions. The symptoms you describe are consistent with slow poisoning, likely administered in small doses over months. I have enclosed a packet of herbs that may slow the progression, but I fear there is no cure. We must identify the culprit quickly. Guard yourself carefully, my friend. More importantly, prepare Eleanor. She will face dangers beyond anything you have trained her for once you are gone. The vultures circle, sensing weakness. I have done as you asked and kept my distance from the princess all these years, though it pains me to remain a shadow. You were right, my presence would only complicate her path. But when the time comes, if she needs me, I will honor my promise. To you, the stone remains safe. When you feel death approaching, remember our arrangement. With deep concern, Arthur. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as realization dawned. Her father had not died of the wasting illness the court physicians had diagnosed. He had been murdered, slowly, deliberately poisoned by someone within the castle walls, someone who still walked free, perhaps even sat on her council. The final letter in the bundle was different, unsealed, unfolded, written in her father's increasingly shaky hand. It was addressed not to Arthur but to her. My beloved daughter Eleanor, if you are reading this, then you have met Arthur and received the stone, just as I planned. Forgive this final deception. There was no other way to ensure your safety. Arthur has been my most trusted friend and ally for 20 years, though you never knew of his existence. Where others sought my favor for advancement, he sought nothing but honest friendship. Where my nobles offered flattery, he offered truth. He has saved my life and Northumbria's future more times than I can count. The stone you now possess has been in our family for generations, its origins lost to time. Legend claims it was a gift from the old ones, those who walked Britain before Romans or Saxons arrived on our shores. It reveals no grand visions, performs no spectacular magic. It simply clarifies truth already known to the heart, but clouded by doubt. I instructed Arthur to remain hidden until you had faced 100 suitors, because I needed you to recognize true worth when you saw it. The stone can guide, but the choice must be yours. Trust Arthur as I have. He knows the dangers you face better than anyone, including the identity of my poisoner, which I suspect but cannot prove. Remember always that a kingdom is not merely land and subjects, but people who trust you with their futures. And remember that even a princess deserves happiness beyond her crown. With eternal love, your father. Eleanor clutched the letter. To her chest, tears flowing freely now. The mysterious stone, the enigmatic stranger, the hidden correspondence, all pieces of a puzzle her father had constructed to protect her even from beyond the grave. Rising from the chair with newfound determination, Eleanor gathered the letters, securing them within the folds of her gown. She needed to find Arthur immediately. If her father's murderer still walked free within the castle walls, every moment of delay put her in greater danger. As she hurried from the library, the stone seemed to pulse warmly against her skin, as if affirming her decision. For the first time since her father's death, Eleanor felt something beyond grief and duty stirring within her. Something that felt dangerously, wonderfully like hope. Twilight had fallen over Northumbria by the time Eleanor slipped out of the castle's side entrance, wrapped in a hooded cloak of dark blue wool. The letters from her father were secured in a leather pouch at her waist, the mysterious stone tucked safely in an inner pocket near her heart. Lady Catherine had been sworn to secrecy, told only that her princess required discretion for a matter of grave importance. The Swan's Nest Tavern sat on the edge of the village that had grown up around the castle walls over centuries. It was a respectable establishment that catered to merchants and travellers rather than local farmhands. Its whitewashed walls and thatched roof well maintained, lanterns casting a warm glow through leaded windows. Eleanor hesitated at the door, suddenly aware of the impropriety of her actions. A princess visiting a tavern alone, seeking a foreign man. It was the stuff of scandalous ballads. Yet the weight of her father's letters propelled her forward. If Arthur truly knew the identity of her father's murderer, no social convention could stand in her way. The tavern's interior was warmer than she expected, scented with roasting meat, fresh bread, and the sweet tang of spiced wine. Conversation hummed pleasantly among the scattered patrons, merchants discussing trades, a group of craftsmen unwinding. After a day's labor, a minstrel quietly tuning his lute in the corner. None paid particular attention to the hooded figure who entered, her bearing regal despite her attempt at anonymity. The tavern keeper, a portly man with a neatly trimmed beard, approached with a welcoming smile. "Good evening, milady. How might I be of service?" Eleanor kept her voice low. "I seek the foreigner, the one staying here." The man's smile faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing with sudden recognition. He glanced around quickly before leaning closer. "Your Highness," he whispered, "you should not be here unescorted." "You recognize me," Eleanor stated, dismayed that her disguise had proven so ineffective. "I served in your father's kitchens for 20 years before opening this establishment," the man explained quietly. "I would know the daughter of King Edward anywhere, hood or no hood." Eleanor studied him more carefully, noting the respectful bow of his head. "Then I trust you understand the need for discretion." "Of course, Your Highness." "The foreigner, Master Arthur, has taken his evening meal in the private room upstairs. Shall I announce you?" "No," Eleanor decided. "Simply show me the way." The tavern keeper led her through the common room and up a narrow staircase, stopping before a heavy oak door. "Second door on the left, Your Highness. He dines alone." With a steadying breath, Eleanor knocked firmly. A moment passed before Arthur's deep voice called, "Enter." The private dining room was modest but comfortable. A table with 2 chairs, a small hearth with a crackling fire, and a window overlooking the village square. Arthur stood as she entered, surprise evident in his expression as she lowered her hood. "Princess," he said, recovering quickly, "I did not expect you so soon." "Murderers rarely grant the luxury of time," Eleanor replied, unfastening her cloak and draping it over a chair. In the firelight, Arthur's features seemed softer, the weathered lines of his face telling stories of sun and wind and distant journeys. "You found the letters," he observed, gesturing for her to sit. Eleanor removed the leather pouch from her belt and placed it on the table between them. "My father was poisoned. You knew this and said nothing this morning." Arthur's blue eyes reflected the dancing flames as he carefully chose his words. "Would you have believed me, a stranger, making such an accusation with no proof? Or would you have had me arrested for slander against the royal physicians?" Eleanor's jaw tightened, knowing he was right. "The letters speak of you observing me for years, following me, reporting to my father about my activities." "Not following," Arthur corrected gently. "Protecting, always from a distance, always with respect." "You've been my shadow," Eleanor said, struggling to reconcile the idea of this unknown guardian with her memories. "For how long?" Arthur sighed, pouring wine into a second cup and offering it to her. "Since you were 20, after the attempt on your life during your journey home from Paris." Eleanor's hand froze midway to the cup. "The bandits on the northern road? That was an assassination attempt, disguised as a common robbery," Arthur confirmed. "Your escort was deliberately led astray by false information about the route. Had I not been following at your father's request?" Memory flashed vividly in Eleanor's mind, her small traveling party ambushed in a wooded ravine, her guards overwhelmed by the number of attackers. Then the mysterious rider appearing from nowhere, his sword flashing with lethal precision, his face concealed by a half-helm. The bandits had fled, and the rider had disappeared into the forest before her guards could offer proper thanks. "That was you," she whispered, recognition dawning. "You saved my life." Arthur inclined his head slightly. The first of several occasions, though the others were less dramatic. Poison detected in time, a paid informant exposed before he could. Relay details of castle defenses. A lady's maid, secretly in the employ of a rival kingdom. Eleanor's mind reeled as she began to understand the extent of the protection she had never known she needed, or had. "Why did my father keep your existence secret from me? Why not place you openly in the royal guard?" "A known protector can be avoided or eliminated," Arthur explained. "An invisible guardian is far more effective, and your father wished you to develop independence, not to feel constantly watched or guarded. He wanted you to become the ruler you are now. Decisive, strong-willed, capable." Eleanor took a deep drink of wine, the rich flavor barely registering as her thoughts tumbled. "In his letter, my father mentioned that you likely know who poisoned him." Arthur's expression darkened. "I have strong suspicions, but not yet proof, beyond doubt. And an accusation without proof against someone of high rank would be problematic." "Tell me," Eleanor demanded, leaning forward. "Lord Blackthorn," Arthur said, his voice low but certain. "Your father's chief counselor, the man who now sits at your right hand and whispers guidance in your ear." The room seemed to tilt around Eleanor. Lord Blackthorn had served her family for decades, had bounced her on his knee as a child, had wept openly at her father's funeral. "Impossible," she breathed. "Power corrupts even the most loyal hearts," Arthur said gently. Blackthorn believed. "Your father was making Northumbria vulnerable through his peace treaties with former enemies. He wanted a stronger military response to Saxon incursions, more aggressive expansion of territory. When your father refused repeatedly, Blackthorn convinced himself he was acting patriotically, removing a weak king to make way for me," Eleanor finished, cold realization washing over her. "A young, inexperienced ruler he could guide, control." Arthur nodded grimly. "Your refusal to marry any of the suitors he subtly endorsed has frustrated his plans. He expected you to choose a husband he could manipulate, creating a king in name, while Blackthorn ruled in truth." Eleanor's fingers curled around her cup, knuckles whitening. "I need proof, incontrovertible evidence that will convince the council and the people." "I have been gathering it, piece by piece," Arthur assured her. "The Venetian physician who identified the poison, The herbalist who sold the specific toxin, rare, slow-acting, nearly untraceable. The servant who was paid to add it to your father's evening tea over many months. How much longer until we have enough? Days, perhaps a week, Arthur replied. But Princess, you must act as though nothing has changed. If Blackthorn suspects you know... Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing the small room. He sits beside me daily, offers counsel I have trusted, stands in my father's place, knowing all the while that his hands carried out my father's murder. Her voice broke on the last word, grief and rage tangling within her. Arthur rose and moved toward her, stopping just short of touching her, maintaining the proper distance between commoner and royalty. Your father knew the risks of his position. He understood that crowns attract both loyalty and treachery. What wounded him most was knowing he would leave you to face these dangers alone. Not alone, Eleanor said, looking up at him with sudden clarity. He left me you. Something shifted in Arthur's expression, a softening, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. Until you have found someone worthy of your trust, yes. Eleanor studied him in the firelight, this man who had protected her for years without recognition or reward, who had been her father's confidant and friend despite the vast difference in their stations. The stone in her pocket seemed to pulse, with warmth, as if responding to her thoughts. My father's letter said you knew the dangers I face better than anyone, she said quietly. It also said I should trust you as he did. Yet how can I fully trust what I do not know? You have seen me at my most vulnerable, observed my life from shadows. I have only just learned your name. Arthur's gaze held hers steadily. What would you know of me, Princess? Everything, Eleanor replied simply. Start with why. Why did you agree to this life in the shadows? What bound you so loyally to my father that you would sacrifice years to his service and mine? Arthur turned toward the window, looking out at the darkened village where a few lanterns still glowed in windows. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory that made him seem suddenly older. 20 years ago, I was not the man you see before you. I was arrogant, reckless, a scholar who believed knowledge made him superior, a swordsman who thought skill made him invincible. During the Northern Rebellion, I found myself on the wrong side of a battle, not through allegiance to the rebels, but through my own foolish confidence that I could navigate danger without consequence. He touched the faint scar that ran along his jawline. Your father found me bleeding on the battlefield, neither friend nor foe, simply a foolish man facing the consequences of his choices. He could have left me to die or taken me prisoner. Instead, he showed mercy, had my wounds tended and spoke with me during his evening meals as I recovered. Arthur turned back to Eleanor, his expression open and unguarded for the first time. In those conversations, I discovered what a true king could be, not merely powerful, but wise, not simply commanding, but discerning. He saw value in me, when I had squandered my own potential, and he offered purpose when I had none. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. So your service was repayment of a debt. It began that way, Arthur acknowledged. It became something more. Friendship, loyalty, shared purpose. Your father gave me back my life. Ensuring yours flourishes became my way of honoring his gift. The simple truth of his words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt the last of her suspicion melting away, replaced by a certainty that transcended logic. This man, complex, mysterious, honorable, had been her unseen guardian for years. Now he stood revealed, ready to help her bring her father's murderer to justice. We will gather the evidence, she said with quiet determination, and when we have it, Lord Blackthorn will face the consequences of his treachery. Dawn broke over Northumbria in shades of pearl and gold, casting long shadows across the castle courtyard where Eleanor stood beside her white palfrey. She wore a simple riding dress of forest green, her hair braided and pinned beneath a modest cap rather than arranged in the elaborate style befitting her station. To any observer, she might have been a noblewoman preparing for a morning ride, not a princess planning to meet with the man who held the key to unveiling her father's murderer. "Are you certain about this, Your Highness?" Lady Catherine asked softly, adjusting Eleanor's cloak with nervous hands. "Riding out with only 2 guards seems most unwise, especially given what you now suspect." Eleanor mounted her horse with practiced grace, settling into the saddle. "2 guards who were personally loyal to my father, men Arthur has confirmed are beyond Blackthorn's influence. It must be this way, Catherine. The fewer who know of our meeting place, the safer we all remain." The lady-in-waiting's face creased with worry. "And if Lord Blackthorn questions your absence from this morning's council meeting, tell him I am observing prayer day for my father's soul," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the cold, fear that had become her constant companion since learning the truth. "He will not dare question such piety. It would seem suspicious even to those who do not yet doubt him." With a final reassuring smile to Catherine, Eleanor nudged her mount forward, leading her small party through the castle gates and down the winding road toward the village. The morning air was crisp with early spring, the countryside beginning to shake off winter's grip. In the fields, peasants were already at work, stopping to bow respectfully as their princess passed. Once beyond the village, Eleanor urged her horse to a faster pace, following the narrow track that led toward the ancient forest that marked Northumbria's eastern boundary. This was no casual excursion. Arthur had sent word through a trusted messenger that he had secured crucial testimony from the servant who had administered the poison to her father. The forest welcomed them with cool green silence. Sunlight filtered through the new leaves, dappling the forest floor with shifting patterns. Birds called from unseen perches, and occasionally a rabbit or fox would dart across their path. Under different circumstances, Eleanor might have found the ride peaceful, even rejuvenating. Today, her mind churned with strategy and righteous anger. "The clearing should be just ahead, Your Highness," Sir Roland, the older of her 2 guards, informed her. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his hand rested readily on his sword hilt, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The small glade appeared suddenly, a perfect circle of sun-drenched grass surrounded by ancient oaks. In its center stood a moss-covered stone altar, relic of faiths long forgotten. And beside it, his back straight and his gaze alert, waited Arthur. He was different here in the forest, Eleanor noticed immediately. His movements, as he approached her horse, had a natural fluidity that seemed constrained within castle walls. The sun caught the silver streaks in his dark hair, and his eyes matched the clear blue of the spring sky overhead. He looked younger, somehow more at ease. "Princess," he greeted her with a respectful bow as she dismounted. "Thank you for coming." Eleanor nodded to her guards, who retreated to the edge of the clearing, close enough to protect if needed, far enough to afford privacy. "Your message said you found the servant. What did you learn?" Arthur gestured toward the stone altar, where he had spread a rough cloth with bread, cheese, and early spring berries. "Please sit. We have much to discuss, and you've ridden far." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before settling onto the sun-warmed stone. Protocol seemed meaningless here in the forest, with birds singing overhead, and the fate of her kingdom hanging in the balance. Arthur sat nearby, close enough for quiet conversation, but maintaining a respectful distance. "The servant's name is Thomas," he began, breaking off a piece of bread and offering it to her. "He was your father's personal cupbearer for the last year of his life. Blackthorn approached him 6 months before your father fell ill, offering gold and protection for his family. Eleanor accepted the bread but couldn't bring herself to eat. Protection from what? From accusations of theft that Blackthorne himself had fabricated, Arthur explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. He created the problem, then offered the solution, a classic tactic of manipulators. And this Thomas simply agreed to poison his king? Eleanor asked, disbelief and disgust coloring her tone. Arthur shook his head. The poison was administered in such small amounts that Thomas believed he was simply delivering medicine, special herbs that Lord Blackthorne claimed would strengthen the king's heart. It was only when your father's condition worsened that Thomas began to suspect the truth. Why did he not come forward then? Eleanor demanded, fingers crushing the bread she held. Fear, Arthur said simply. By then he was implicated in the crime, whether knowingly or not, and Blackthorne made certain to remind him regularly that his family's safety depended on his silence. Eleanor stood abruptly, unable to contain her restless energy. Where is this Thomas now? Will he testify before the council? He's hidden in a monastery near the Scottish border, Arthur replied, rising to stand beside her. And yes, he will testify, though he fears for his life in doing so. As well he should, Eleanor said bitterly. He may not have known, but his hand still carried the poison that killed my father. Arthur studied her face with unexpected gentleness. Vengeance is a natural desire, Princess. But remember that justice must be your goal if you wish to rule, as your father would have wanted. Eleanor turned away, emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. You speak as though you know my heart as well as you knew his. I don't presume such familiarity, Arthur said quietly. But I have observed you enough to know that you have your father's capacity for mercy alongside your mother's fierce sense of justice. At the mention of her mother, dead 16 years now, Eleanor felt tears prick behind her eyes. She moved away from Arthur toward the edge of the clearing, needing a moment to compose herself. The sunlight through the trees cast shifting patterns on her dress, reminding her of how shadows and light had played in the great hall during her father's court sessions. My father used to say that a ruler's greatest challenge is balancing what is just with what is merciful, she said finally, her back still to Arthur. I always thought I understood what he meant. Now I wonder if I ever will. She felt rather than heard Arthur approach, stopping just behind her, close enough that she could sense his presence without him touching her. The impropriety of their situation struck her suddenly. Alone in the forest save for 2 guards, confiding in a man who was neither family nor official advisor. Yet she had never felt safer or more certain of another's loyalty. You already do understand, Arthur said, his deep voice gentle. Justice without mercy becomes cruelty. Mercy without justice becomes weakness. Your father walked that line with wisdom, and you will too. Eleanor turned to face him, surprised to find him so near. In the dappled forest light, she could see flecks of grey in his blue eyes, the faint lines of laughter at their corners despite the gravity of his expression. Something shifted in her perception, no longer seeing just her father's loyal friend or her mysterious guardian, but simply Arthur, a man of depth and principle standing before her. When this is over, she said impulsively, what will you do? Will you disappear again, become someone else's shadow? Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or a more complex emotion she couldn't name. I hadn't thought beyond securing justice for your father, he admitted. My purpose these many years has been clear. Afterward, he trailed off, looking past her into the ancient trees. You could stay, Eleanor suggested, the words escaping before she could consider their implications. Northumbria will need rebuilding after Blackthorne's betrayal is revealed. I will need advisors I can trust absolutely. Arthur's gaze returned to her face, searching. A foreign commoner as royal advisor? The court would never accept it. The court will accept what their princess decrees, Eleanor replied with quiet Authority. Then, more softly, you've spent years protecting me from afar. Perhaps it's time you stood in the light. The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor became acutely aware of her racing heart, of the stone warm against her skin where it rested in a pouch around her neck, of the birdsong that continued unaffected by human concerns. Arthur broke the silence first, stepping back slightly. We should return to the matter at hand. Thomas's testimony alone may not be enough to convince the entire council. We need more evidence. Perhaps the Venetian physician's report, or Arthur, Eleanor interrupted, a hint of her royal authority returning to her voice. You haven't answered my question. He met her gaze directly, his expression softening. If you wish me to stay when this is done, Princess, I will stay. My loyalty to your father has not ended with his death, nor is it transferable solely to his crown. It extends to you, to Eleanor, not merely to the Princess of Northumbria. The distinction warmed her in a way she hadn't expected. How long? Had it been since anyone had seen her as simply Eleanor? Perhaps not since her father's death, perhaps not even before. Good, she said, attempting to reclaim some semblance of formal distance despite the intimacy of the moment they had just shared. Now, tell me what evidence we still need to gather, and how quickly we can bring Blackthorn to justice. As Arthur outlined their strategy, Eleanor found herself watching his hands as he spoke, strong, capable hands that had wielded a sword in her defense, penned letters to her father, and now gestured emphatically as he described how they would expose her. Father's murderer, hands that had never sought to grasp power for themselves, only to protect those who held it rightfully. In that moment, with sunlight streaming through ancient trees and the scent of spring surrounding them, Eleanor recognized a truth her heart had been trying to tell her since that first meeting in the great hall. The stone around her neck seemed to pulse with warmth, confirming what she had not yet dared to acknowledge, even to herself. When she had placed the stone in Arthur's hand, days ago, it wasn't merely fulfilling her father's enigmatic instruction. It was her heart recognizing, before her mind could follow, exactly who deserved not just the stone, but perhaps eventually something far more precious. The great hall of Northumbria Castle hummed with tension as nobles and council members gathered for what they believed was merely another session to discuss the princess's marriage prospects. Tapestries depicting great battles and hunts adorned the stone walls, while spring sunlight streamed through high windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. The scent of beeswax candles and fresh rushes strewn with herbs filled the space, attempting to mask the underlying aroma of too many bodies in wool and velvet. Eleanor sat upon her father's throne, resplendent in a gown of deep royal blue embroidered with silver thread, her auburn hair crowned with a simple silver circlet. To the observant eye, she might have appeared unusually pale, her knuckles white where they gripped the carved arms of the throne. But her expression remained impassive, revealing nothing of the storm that raged within. At her right hand stood Lord Blackthorn, his lean face set in its customary expression of dignified concern. At 60 years of age, his beard and hair had long since turned silver, giving him an air of wisdom that had served him well in manipulating both court and kingdom. He leaned slightly toward Eleanor, murmuring advice she pretended to consider, while her skin crawled at his proximity. "The Prince of Mercia grows impatient, Your Highness," Blackthorn was saying, his voice smooth as honey, yet laced with subtle rebuke. 107 days have passed since you began receiving suitors. The council fears neighboring kingdoms begin to question your intentions, or worse, your stability. Eleanor turned to him with a smile that did not reach her eyes. How fortunate then, Lord Blackthorn, that today's assembly will put such concerns to rest. Something flickered in the older man's gaze, the first hint of uncertainty. Indeed. You have made a decision regarding the prince's proposal? I have made many decisions, Eleanor replied cryptically, raising her hand to signal the herald. The great doors opened, and the herald's voice rang out, announcing the Prince of Mercia and his entourage. The assembled nobles parted as a procession entered. The prince himself, a handsome man of 30, with a carefully cultivated beard and rich attire, followed by his advisors and guards. He approached the throne with practiced charm, sweeping into a bow that displayed both respect and self-assurance. "Princess Eleanor," he greeted her, rising with a smile that had won many hearts at many courts. "Your beauty outshines even the tales that have reached Mercia. I am honored by your audience." Eleanor inclined her head slightly. "Prince Edward, Northumbria welcomes you and your distinguished company." The prince's smile widened as he produced a small velvet box from within his embroidered tunic. "I bring a token of Mercia's esteem and my personal admiration." He opened the box to reveal a magnificent ruby pendant surrounded by pearls. Gasps of appreciation echoed through the hall. "Most generous," Eleanor commented, making no move to accept the gift. "You must be weary from your journey. Please, be seated. We have matters of great importance to discuss." A flicker of confusion crossed the prince's face at this departure from the expected protocol, but he bowed again and moved to the place of honor set for him. Lord Blackthorn shifted uncomfortably beside Eleanor, clearly displeased by her failure to show proper enthusiasm for the prince's offering. "Your Highness," he murmured, "perhaps a word of gratitude for the prince's magnificent gift would be—" "Herald," Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Announce our final guest." Blackthorn's head snapped up, his composure finally cracking. "Final guest? I was not informed of any additional—" The herald's voice boomed again. "Arthur of Constantinople, special envoy of the late King Edward." The doors opened once more, and Arthur entered. Gone was the simple traveller who had first appeared before her. Today he wore attire befitting his announced station, not ostentatious, but quality dark blue tunic over a fine linen shirt, a silver pendant bearing the royal seal of Northumbria hanging openly at his throat. Eleanor had commissioned it herself 3 days prior, a public symbol of the authority she had granted him. Whispers erupted throughout the hall. Lord Blackthorn's face drained of colour as he leaned toward Eleanor, his voice now harsh with barely controlled alarm. "What is the meaning of this? This man is no envoy. He is a commoner, an interloper who carried my father's most trusted communications for 20 years, Eleanor finished for him, her voice pleasantly conversational, yet pitched to carry, who served the crown of Northumbria on missions too delicate for official channels, who my father trusted above all others with matters of grave importance to the kingdom." The hall fell silent as Arthur approached the throne and bowed deeply, first to Eleanor and then, with perfect diplomacy, to the Prince of Mercia. When he straightened, his eyes met Eleanor's briefly, steady, reassuring, before he turned to face the assembled nobility. "My lords and ladies of Northumbria," he began, his deep voice resonating in the hushed space, "I come before you today at the request of your princess, and in fulfillment of a sacred oath made to your late king. For too long, a shadow has fallen across this great kingdom. Today, that shadow will be lifted." Lord Blackthorn stepped forward, his hand moving to the ceremonial dagger at his belt. "Guards, seize this impostor who dares speak with such familiarity of our beloved king." But the guards did not move. Eleanor had spent the past 3 days carefully selecting which men would be present today. Men whose loyalty to her father had been absolute, men whom Arthur had confirmed were beyond Blackthorn's influence. "They will not obey you, my lord," Eleanor said, rising from her throne. "Not today, not ever again." She descended the steps, the stone hanging visibly now around her neck, glowing with a faint inner light that drew all eyes. For the past week, I have been gathering evidence of a crime so heinous it shakes the very foundation of our kingdom. The murder of a king, my father, by slow poison, administered over months. Gasps and cries of shock echoed through the hall. The Prince of Mercia stood, his diplomatic smile replaced by genuine concern. Princess Eleanor, these are grave accusations. What evidence supports such claims? At Eleanor's nod, Arthur stepped forward again, producing a sealed document. The testimony of the Venetian physician who identified the poison in King Edward's remains. The confession of the servant who unknowingly administered it, believing it to be medicine. And this, he produced a second document, the record of payments made to procure a rare Eastern toxin, signed by the hand of Lord Blackthorne himself. All eyes turned to Blackthorne, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. "Lies and forgeries," he snarled, backing away. "This foreigner has bewitched our princess with false tales." "Not false," came a trembling voice from the side entrance to the hall. Thomas, the former cupbearer, stepped forward, flanked by two of Eleanor's most trusted guards. The young man's face was drawn with fear, but his eyes held determination. As he pointed directly at Blackthorne, "You told me it was medicine for the king's heart. You promised gold for my family if I added 3 drops to his evening wine each night. You swore it would strengthen him." Blackthorne's hand finally drew his dagger, his composure shattering completely. "Foolish girl," he spat at Eleanor, decades of respectful pretense falling away. "Your father was weakening our kingdom with his peaceful overtures and treaties. Northumbria needed strength, needed expansion. You were to be my puppet, ruling in name while I restored our greatness." The hall erupted in chaos as Blackthorne lunged, not toward Eleanor as many expected, but toward the nearest exit. 2 guards moved to intercept him, but with the desperate strength of a cornered animal, he slashed at them, drawing blood from one's arm before breaking for the door. "Stop him!" Eleanor commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. Arthur moved with unexpected speed, intercepting Blackthorne before he could reach the exit. The older man slashed wildly with his dagger, but Arthur sidestepped with the practiced ease of a trained swordsman, catching Blackthorne's wrist and twisting until the weapon clattered to the floor. A swift strike to the back of Blackthorne's knees brought the traitor down, kneeling before the assembled court, Arthur's firm grip on his shoulder, preventing escape. Eleanor approached slowly, the hall falling silent once more as she stood before the man who had murdered her father and plotted to control her throne. Her face was a mask of regal composure, but those close enough could see the fire burning in her eyes. "Lord Blackthorne," she said, her voice steady and clear, "you are charged with high treason against the crown of Northumbria, the murder of King Edward, and conspiracy against his rightful heir. The evidence against you is irrefutable. What say you before sentence is pronounced?" Blackthorne looked up at her, hatred twisting his once dignified features. "You are a fool, just like your father. Without me, this kingdom will fall to stronger neighbors within a year." Eleanor regarded him coldly. "That is not a defense, my lord. It is merely the delusion that led you to betray your king." She turned to address the stunned court. "The punishment for high treason is death. However, in honor of the many years Lord Blackthorne served my father before ambition corrupted him, I commute his sentence to life imprisonment in the Northern Tower, with all lands and titles stripped from him and his family line." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembly, some approving of the mercy shown, others disappointed at the lack of a more dramatic justice. The Prince of Mercia stepped forward, bowing deeply to Eleanor. "Princess, Mercia stands in awe of your wisdom and strength," he said, genuine respect replacing his earlier diplomatic charm. "Few rulers could face such betrayal with such composure." Eleanor inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Prince Edward, I thank you for your kind words and for the magnificent gift you offered earlier. However, I must inform you, with all respect, to Mercia and its noble house, that I cannot accept your proposal of marriage." The prince's eyebrows rose in surprise, but before he could respond, Eleanor continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "For 100 days, I received suitors who offered wealth, alliances, armies, all the external trappings of power, yet not one offered what a kingdom truly needs in its rulers: loyalty, wisdom, and the courage to stand for truth even when standing alone." Her hand moved to touch the stone at her throat, which seemed to glow more brightly. "My father left me with a final gift. Not just this ancient stone that has been in our family for generations, but the wisdom to recognize true worth when I encountered it." She turned toward Arthur, who had relinquished Blackthorn to the guards, and now stood straight and dignified before the court. "In Arthur, I have found an advisor whose loyalty has been proven not through words or gifts, but through 20 years of selfless service to Northumbria, often at great personal risk, always without recognition or reward." Eleanor extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Arthur stepped forward to take it, a gesture that sent fresh whispers cascading through the hall. "I present to you Arthur of Constantinople, newly appointed as first Councillor of Northumbria," Eleanor announced. "The man who uncovered my father's murder and helped bring his killer to justice. From this day forward, he will stand openly at the throne he has protected from the shadows for so long." The Prince of Mercia studied the tableau before him. The princess, with her head held high, her hand joined with that of the foreign commoner who had somehow earned such unprecedented trust. After a moment, he smiled ruefully and bowed again. "Northumbria is fortunate indeed in its princess," he said graciously. "Mercia would welcome an alliance of friendship, if not marriage, with such a discerning ruler." As the hall erupted, in the mixture of applause, confused murmurs, and the excited buzz of courtiers processing the day's extraordinary events, Eleanor felt the stone grow warm against her skin. Beside her, still holding her hand in full view of the court, Arthur leaned, close enough to whisper, "Your father would be proud beyond words." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently before releasing it, aware of the many eyes upon them and the boundaries that still existed despite all that had changed. "This is only the beginning," she replied softly. "Northumbria has much healing ahead." But as she gazed out at her subjects, some bewildered, some inspired, all irrevocably changed by what they had witnessed, Eleanor felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. With truth restored and justice served, the kingdom could begin anew. And perhaps in time, its princess might find not just purpose in her crown, but joy in the unexpected path her heart had discovered. Summer had settled over Northumbria like a gentle blessing, bringing with it lush greenery, abundant blooms, and skies of perfect azure that seemed to promise endless possibilities. 3 months had passed since Lord Blackthorn's treachery had been exposed. 3 months of healing, rebuilding trust, and establishing a new order that honored King Edward's legacy while embracing Eleanor's vision for the future. The hidden garden where Eleanor now stood had been her mother's creation, a secluded sanctuary within the castle walls that few knew existed. High stone walls covered with climbing roses and ivy sheltered the space from prying eyes, while ancient apple trees provided dappled shade over winding gravel paths. In the center, a small fountain bubbled serenely, surrounded by herbs and flowers from distant lands that filled the air with intoxicating fragrance. Eleanor paced the perimeter of the garden, her fingers trailing through lavender blossoms that released their soothing scent into the warm afternoon air. She wore not her usual formal attire, but a simple gown of ivory silk, unadorned save for delicate embroidery at the sleeves and hem. Her auburn hair fell loose down her back, crowned only with a circlet of white roses and forget-me-nots that Lady Catherine had woven with tears of joy that morning. "You're going to wear a path through your mother's time if you continue pacing. Your Highness," Catherine teased gently, adjusting a garland of flowers on the small stone archway that had been erected at the garden's center. Eleanor smiled, acknowledging her nervousness with a small laugh. "I've faced down traitorous lords and foreign dignitaries without flinching. Why should this day make my hands tremble so?" "Because this day is not about the princess ruling Northumbria," Catherine replied with the wisdom of a lifelong confidant. "It is about Eleanor following her heart." A soft knock at the garden gate interrupted their exchange. Catherine hurried to open it, revealing Father Thomas, the elderly priest who had baptized Eleanor as an infant and had served as the castle's spiritual advisor for over 30 years. "Is it time already?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old priest nodded, his kind eyes twinkling. "The guests are assembled, Your Highness. Few in number as you requested, but great in their love for you and your father's memory." Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her gown. The decision to hold this ceremony in private, away from the pomp and spectacle that would normally accompany a royal wedding, had raised eyebrows among some courtiers. But after the public drama of Blackthorn's exposure and the subsequent political maneuverings, Eleanor had craved simplicity and authenticity for this most personal of moments. "And he is here?" she asked, unable to keep a hint of vulnerability from her voice. Father Thomas smiled. "Waiting beneath the archway, looking every bit as nervous as you, if I may say so." This image, Arthur nervous, perhaps shifting his weight from foot to foot or adjusting the collar of his formal tunic, brought a rush of tenderness that steadied Eleanor's racing heart. In the months since he had stepped from the shadows into his public role as first counselor, their relationship had evolved with careful, deliberate steps. Public propriety had been maintained even as private conversations beside the library fire had deepened their understanding of one another. The court had buzzed with speculation, of course. Some approved of the foreign advisor, whose wisdom had quickly become evident in council meetings. Others whispered that a princess lowered herself by showing such favor to a man of common birth. But as spring had turned to summer, as Arthur's policies had strengthened trade and improved relations with neighboring kingdoms, even the most skeptical nobles had begun to acknowledge his worth. And through it all, the stone, now set in a silver pendant that Eleanor wore always, had remained warm against her skin, a constant reminder of her father's final gift, the wisdom to recognize where true value lay. "I'm ready," Eleanor said, gathering her simple bouquet of wildflowers that matched those in her hair. Father Thomas offered his arm, assuming the role that would have been her father's. Together, they walked the winding path toward the heart of the garden, where a small gathering awaited beneath flowering trees. No trumpets announced her arrival, no heralds called her titles. There was only the gentle music of a single lute played by the castle's musician from his discreet position beside a flowering quince. The guests, no more than 20 trusted friends and advisors, turned as she approached. Lady Catherine and Sir Roland, the loyal guard who had accompanied her to many meetings with Arthur before he had emerged from the shadows. The young servant Thomas, pardoned and given a new position in the royal household for his courage in testifying against Blackthorn. A few council members who had proven their loyalty during the difficult transition, and standing slightly apart, the Venetian physician whose evidence had helped convict her father's murderer, now appointed as the castle's chief healer. But Eleanor saw none of them clearly. Her eyes were fixed on the figure waiting beneath the flower-decked archway, standing tall and steady as he had always been in times of crisis, yet with an openness in his expression that few besides Eleanor had ever witnessed. Arthur wore a deep blue tunic that matched his eyes, simple in cut but made of fine fabric that Eleanor had commissioned specially. The royal insignia of Northumbria was embroidered subtly on one shoulder, not claiming rank, but acknowledging service. His dark hair, now trimmed more carefully than in his days as a traveller, still bore distinguished streaks of silver at the temples. But it was his eyes that captured Eleanor's attention, eyes that had watched over her from a distance for years, now gazing directly at her with unconcealed adoration. As she reached him, Father Thomas placed her hand in Arthur's, a gesture symbolic of giving a bride away, though in truth, Eleanor had given herself freely, after months of careful consideration and against the whispered concerns of traditionalists at court. "You look," Arthur began, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. He shook his head slightly, a smile spreading across his face. "Words fail me, Eleanor. You are radiant." The use of her name without title, still rare, still reserved for their most private moments, warmed her more than any elaborate compliment could have. "As do you," she replied softly. "My father would approve of how well you wear Northumbria's colours." A shadow of emotion crossed Arthur's face at the mention of King Edward. "I wish he could be here," he said quietly, for her ears alone, "to see the extraordinary ruler his daughter has become." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "He is here in every way that matters." Father Thomas cleared his throat gently, drawing their attention back to the ceremony at hand. As the elderly priest began the traditional words that would bind them as husband and wife, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This garden, where she had played as a child under her mother's watchful eye and later sought solace after both parents were gone, now witnessed the beginning of her own family, unexpected, unconventional, but deeply true. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, incorporating elements of both Northumbrian tradition and customs from Arthur's Byzantine heritage. When the time came to exchange vows, Eleanor spoke clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the intimate garden. "My father taught me to be strong, to rule with wisdom and justice, but you, Arthur, taught me that strength does not preclude tenderness, that wisdom includes knowing one's own heart, and that true justice recognizes worth, beyond titles or birth. I take you as my husband, my partner in all things, my trusted companion in both matters of state and matters of the heart." Arthur's eyes glistened as he responded, his deep voice steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. "Eleanor, I came to Northumbria 20 years ago, lost and without purpose. Your father gave me direction, a cause worthy of devotion. But you have given me something I never dared hope for, acceptance not just for my service, but for myself. I take you as my wife, not because you are a princess, but because you are Eleanor, brave, discerning, and more precious to me than crown or kingdom." Father Thomas smiled benevolently as he pronounced them husband and wife according to the laws of the church and the kingdom. A gentle murmur of approval rippled through the small gathering as Arthur leaned forward to seal their union with a kiss. It was their first public display of affection, carefully restrained, yet undeniably tender. Arthur's hand cradled Eleanor's cheek with infinite gentleness, as though she were made of the most delicate porcelain, while her fingers lightly gripped the front of his tunic, anchoring herself in the reality of this moment that had once seemed impossible. When they parted, the stone at Eleanor's throat glowed with an inner light that seemed to reflect the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the apple blossoms overhead. Arthur touched it gently, a silent acknowledgement of the path that had led them here, a path laid by a king's foresight and a daughter's courage to follow her heart. The small assembly erupted in delighted applause as Arthur and Eleanor turned to face them, hands still joined. No grand reception would follow, No elaborate feast with hundreds of noble guests, only a simple meal shared among true friends in the garden as twilight softened the summer sky. Later, as stars began to appear above the garden walls and lanterns cast a golden glow over the gathering, Eleanor found herself momentarily alone beside the fountain. Arthur had stepped away to speak with the Venetian physician, their heads bent in earnest conversation about some matter of kingdom business that couldn't wait even for a wedding day. The sight brought a smile to Eleanor's lips rather than disappointment. This was the reality she had chosen, a partnership where matters of state would always intertwine with personal joy, where her husband's dedication to Northumbria's welfare matched her own. There would be no artificial separation between duty and love, no conflict between crown and heart. As if sensing her thoughts, Arthur looked up and caught her eye across the garden. With a brief word to the physician, he made his way back to her side, taking her hand and raising it to his lips in a gesture that somehow combined courtly respect with intimate affection. "Happy, my queen?" he asked softly, using the title that would soon be formally bestowed upon her at her coronation, though he alone used it with such personal tenderness. Eleanor leaned against him slightly, propriety relaxed among trusted friends and in the privacy of the sheltered garden. "Happier than I ever thought possible while still fulfilling my duty to Northumbria," she admitted. "My father once told me that finding the right partner would not divide my loyalties, but strengthen them. I didn't understand him then." "And now?" Arthur asked, his arm slipping around her waist. Eleanor looked up at the man who had protected her from shadows, who had helped her bring her father's murderer to justice, who had stood beside her as she navigated the treacherous waters of court politics, and who now stood beside her as husband, bound by both love and shared purpose. "Now I understand perfectly," she replied, raising her face to his for another kiss as the evening stars winked their approval from the darkening sky above the secret garden. Autumn painted Northumbria in hues of gold and crimson as the first anniversary of King Edward's death approached. The morning air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from distant hearths as Queen Eleanor and Arthur made their way down the winding path that led to the royal crypt. Guards walked at a respectful distance behind them, providing security while allowing the couple the privacy of their thoughts. Eleanor wore a gown of deep burgundy, her status as queen now evident in the finer details of her attire rather than in ostentatious display. The simple gold circlet that served as her everyday crown glinted in the morning sunlight, matched by the gold threads woven through her auburn hair, now styled in an elegant braid wrapped around her head. At her throat, the stone, her father's, mysterious final gift, hung in its silver setting, warm against her skin despite the cool autumn air. Arthur walked beside her, their steps naturally falling into the same rhythm after nearly 6 months of marriage. His position as royal consort and first counselor had been formalized at Eleanor's coronation 3 months prior, an event that had finally silenced most critics of their unconventional union. He wore a tunic of forest green with Northumbria's royal insignia embroidered on the chest, no longer just acknowledging service, but claiming rightful place. "You're very quiet this morning," Arthur observed gently, his hand brushing against hers as they walked. Eleanor offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Anniversary days are always difficult. I find myself remembering his last hours, the things said and unsaid, the questions I never thought to ask." Arthur nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. "He would be proud of all you've accomplished this year. The Northern Treaty alone would have pleased him immensely. The treaty that bears your diplomatic fingerprints as much as mine," Eleanor reminded him, genuine warmth now softening her expression. The alliance with Scotland that Arthur had helped negotiate had secured Northumbria's most vulnerable border, for the first time in generations, fulfilling one of her father's most cherished dreams. They reached the entrance to the royal crypt, a solemn structure of ancient stone set into the hillside beyond the castle gardens. Guards opened the heavy oak doors, bowing deeply as the royal couple passed inside. Cool, still air enveloped them as they descended worn stone steps into the torchlit chamber where generations of Northumbria's rulers lay in eternal rest. King Edward's tomb occupied the most recent position, carved from pale marble that seemed to capture and hold the torchlight. His likeness was etched upon the lid, not the aged king who had died of poison, but the strong ruler in his prime, his expression noble and wise. Around the base, scenes from his greatest achievements were depicted in bas-relief, treaties signed, justice dispensed, the kingdom flourishing under his guidance. Eleanor approached the tomb slowly, her fingers trailing over the cool marble. "Hello, Father," she whispered, the words echoing softly in the sacred space. Arthur hung back, giving her this moment alone with her memories. He watched as she stood in silent communion with the Father who had brought them together through his final mysterious gift. The stone at Eleanor's throat seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight, responding to the proximity of its former owner. After several minutes of silence, Eleanor beckoned Arthur forward. From within the folds of her gown, she withdrew a small silk pouch, the same one that had held her father's letters, discovered in the library cabinet a year before. Now it contained something else, something they had discussed at length during the quiet evenings of their new marriage. "Are you certain?" Arthur asked softly, understanding her intention without words. Eleanor nodded, her eyes clear and resolved. "The stone has served its purpose. My father said it reveals truth already known to the heart, but clouded by doubt. I have no more doubts about my ability to rule, about the path forward for Northumbria, or about us." She took his hand, squeezing it gently. "The stone belongs with him now, a symbol that his final wish was fulfilled." Together they approached a small niche that had been carved into the base of the tomb, a space traditionally left for personal tributes from family members, usually containing small mementos or written prayers. Eleanor carefully removed the stone from its silver setting, the pendant that had rested against her heart through all the tumultuous events of the past year. In her palm, the stone seemed to pulse one final time with that mysterious inner light that had guided her to Arthur, that had confirmed her father's wisdom even from beyond death. She placed it gently in the niche, Arthur's hand covering hers, as together they completed this act of reverence and closure. "Thank you, Father," Eleanor whispered, her voice steady despite the sheen of tears in her eyes, "for teaching me to recognize true worth, for trusting me to find my own path, and for the gift that led me to the love I never expected to find." Arthur's arm slipped around her waist, supporting her as emotion threatened to overwhelm her composed exterior. "And thank you, my friend," he added softly to the tomb, "for seeing value in a lost man, for entrusting me with your greatest treasure, and for believing I could be worthy of her." They stood in silence for several moments, the only sound the distant drip of water somewhere in the ancient crypt and the soft crackling of torches along the walls. The stone rested in its new home, no longer glowing but peaceful, its purpose complete. As they finally turned to leave, Eleanor paused, looking back at her father's tomb with newfound peace. "He used to tell me that the greatest legacy a ruler can leave is not monuments or conquests, but people whose lives were made better by their decisions." Arthur nodded, understanding the profound truth in King Edward's wisdom. "By that measure, his legacy is secure, and yours continues to grow." With each passing day, they ascended the stone steps back toward sunlight and fresh air, toward the kingdom that awaited their continued guidance. As they emerged from the crypt, Eleanor blinked in the sudden brightness, her eyes adjusting to reveal a sight that caught her breath. The people of Northumbria, from noble families to simple villagers, had gathered silently along the path, heads bowed in respect for the anniversary of their beloved king's passing. No official announcement had been made of the royal couple's visit to the crypt. The people had simply known, had come of their own accord to pay tribute not only to King Edward's memory, but to the daughter who carried forward his legacy. As Eleanor and Arthur began to walk the path back to the castle, the assembled people did not cheer or call out. Such celebration would have been inappropriate for the solemn day. Instead, they bowed or curtsied as the couple passed, many leaving. Small bundles of autumn flowers or handwritten notes along the pathway to the crypt. The sight moved Eleanor deeply. This was the true measure of her father's reign, not in grand monuments or military victories, but in the genuine love of his people, now transferred to her through their respect and trust. She walked among them with dignity, tempered by gratitude, acknowledging each gesture with a nod or gentle smile. Near the end of the gathered crowd stood a familiar figure, Thomas, the former cup-bearer whose testimony had helped bring Lord Blackthorne to justice. Beside him stood a young woman holding a small child, presumably the family he had feared for during Blackthorne's manipulations. As Eleanor and Arthur approached, Thomas stepped forward, his expression solemn but eyes clear of the fear that had haunted him a year ago. "Your Majesties," he said, bowing deeply, "my family and I came to honor King Edward and to thank you for the mercy shown to me when justice alone might have demanded harsher punishment." Eleanor stopped before him, studying the man whose unwitting hands had delivered her father's poison. Where once she might have seen only an instrument of Blackthorne's treachery, she now recognized a fellow victim, a man who had found the courage to speak truth despite terrible fear. The balance between justice and mercy is the foundation of true rulership, she said, echoing her father's teaching. My father understood this better than most. I merely follow his example. Thomas bowed again, gratitude evident in every line of his body. His wife stepped forward, the child in her arms reaching out with innocent curiosity toward Eleanor's glittering circlet. The simple gesture, a baby unaware of royal protocol, reaching for something bright, brought unexpected laughter from the Queen, breaking the solemnity of the moment with genuine warmth. As they continued toward the castle, Arthur's hand found Eleanor's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become natural over the months of their marriage. Your father once told me that a kingdom is only as strong as the bonds between its people, he said quietly. I think he would find Northumbria very strong indeed today. Eleanor nodded, her heart full as she looked back one final time at her father's crypt, now surrounded by flowers left by loving subjects. The stone that had guided her to Arthur, that had helped her recognize truth when deception swirled around her, now rested where it belonged, with the king whose wisdom continued to shape Northumbria's future through his daughter and the man he had trusted with her happiness. In the stone rests his legacy, Eleanor said softly, but in our hearts lives his wisdom, and in our actions his love for this kingdom will continue. She turned her face toward the castle that was both her inheritance and her responsibility, toward the future that stretched before them full of possibility. Come, husband, there is still much to do. Together they walked the final distance to the castle gates, no longer princess and protector, no longer queen and advisor, but simply Eleanor and Arthur, united by a king's final gift, bound by love, that had withstood the crucible of conspiracy and emerged stronger, dedicated to honoring the legacy that had brought them together through a simple stone and the wisdom to recognize when to give it away. The story of Eleanor and Arthur reminds us that sometimes the most valuable gifts aren't gold or jewels, but wisdom to recognize what truly matters. King Edward's final gift, a simple stone, carried no power of its own, but served as a guide to truth already known in the heart. How often do we ignore our instincts, doubting what we feel to be true? How many times do we value appearance over substance, choosing glittering falsehoods over quiet integrity? In a world that often measures worth by titles and possessions, Eleanor's journey challenges us to look deeper. Would you have the courage to trust a stranger when everyone advised against it? Would you follow your heart, even if it led you against tradition and expectation? Sometimes the most profound love and loyalty come from unexpected places, and the most precious treasures are those that cannot be displayed in royal treasuries. If this tale of mystery, justice, and unexpected love touched your heart, please support our channel by subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate stories of authentic connection. Like this video and leave a comment telling us what you would have done if you were Princess Eleanor, facing 100 suitors with a mysterious stone in your pocket. New stories of love, courage, and emotional journeys await you every week on our channel.